Good morning, and welcome to the final of 4 webinars in Isap's Ecosystem Market Summer Series. Through this series, we've heard from input providers, looked at different data platforms, discussed the role of agriculture plays in corporate sustainability goals, and today we're going beyond carbon with an accounting of the multiple ecosystem services provided by well-managed farmland and a look at some water quality markets happening across the Midwest. We're also joined by a farmer who has vast experience and advice for others contemplating carbon markets. I am Jean Brokish, the Midwest Program Manager for American Farmland Trust, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Dr. Emily Bruner, the Midwest Science Director. American Farmland Trust is a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. We are also joined behind the scenes by Beth Frazier, AFT's National Agricultural Land Network Manager, who is assisting with technical support during today's webinar. American Farmland Trust works closely through the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, also known as Isap, working together with conservation and ag commodity groups to accelerate the adoption of conservation practices that improve soil health and reduce nutrient loss. There's 13 organizations within Isap, and I'd like to give special recognition to members of Isap that helped plan today's webinar: the Illinois Corn Growers, Illinois Soybean Association, the University of Illinois Extension, the Agricultural Drainage Management Coalition, and the Nature Conservancy. And again, we are joined behind the scenes with Megan Baskerville from the Nature Conservancy. She has done a great job of building and sharing our slide deck. Thank you, Megan. This webinar series also benefited from collaboration and support from partner organizations in Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, and Wisconsin. Individuals from these organizations were critical to the success way back in our very first webinar in February, as well as through this series. Their continued engagement and help to develop content and connect us with presenters for this series has been invaluable. And we, of course, appreciate your interest and attendance today. Over 500 people are registered for today's webinar, and we invite you to be part of the conversation by submitting questions for our presenters by using the question bar, which is on your GoToWebinar dashboard. You can also use that question bar to alert staff of any tech issues you might be having. I also want to thank today's presenters. I think today's discussion is really going to be interesting. We are joined by Aliza Wasserman-Drews from the Rural Investment to Protect Our Environment and Bartlett Durand from the Sand County Foundation. And in the second half, we'll be joined by Jim Whitaker, a farmer with 15 years of experience with eco markets. And I'll provide more information and introduce each of today's presenters as we get to their slot in the agenda. But first, I'm going to pass it over to Emily for a bit of context.
Great, thank you, Jean. And thanks again to everyone for joining us today. I'd like to briefly introduce Isap's vision for this webinar series, highlighting the 3 major objectives, which were to engage farmers, ag retailers, and advisors and other professionals in the exploration of ecosystem market opportunities, provide transparent and accessible information around market incentives, and then increase confidence among farmers in evaluating these new programs. We want to make it clear that we're not endorsing these programs or companies, and we're not promoting any one opportunity over another. We merely want to facilitate data sharing among our farmer networks and help folks make their own decisions about what may be or what may not be right on their own farms. Next slide, please. So we've been overwhelmed with the level of interest and support we've received in organizing this webinar series, and we want to express our gratitude to all our partners as well as the featured presenters for their time and effort behind the scenes to ensure that this webinar is as informative as possible. We launched our series, as Jean mentioned, in February, bringing NORI, Indigo Ag, the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, and ESMC all to one table to provide farmers a side-by-side comparison of market opportunities. Our summer series started in June, detailing carbon market programs available from Bayer, Corteva, Nutrien, and exploring innovative markets and data platforms available from SIBO, Gradable by Farmers Business Network, and Truterra. On Tuesday, we heard about ecosystem market opportunities through the lens of grain buyers and consumer packaged good companies, including Cargill, PepsiCo, and General Mills. And today, we're going to round out our series highlighting additional potential revenue streams for ecosystem services. We'll wrap up with a conversation with Jim Whitaker, who will share his experiences as both a farmer and a carbon market developer. Next slide, please. So recordings of our previous webinars, along with the fact sheets summarizing the programs and platforms featured, can be found at the link provided in the chat. These fact sheets also highlight several tools and reports that can serve as a great starting point for anyone interested in digging deeper into quantifying outcomes of conservation practices. We also want to just go ahead and put on everyone's radar that we're working to compile all the information from the webinar series alongside some key decision support criteria and important considerations in a succinct resource document. We also anticipate developing slide decks for shared use for our conservation partners. So just encouraging anyone who's interested in contributing to these efforts to please contact Jean or myself. We are trying to be as inclusive as possible in sharing a common message around these opportunities and practices. Next slide, please. So again, as Jean mentioned, for our July events, the goal is to move the conversation beyond carbon and help provide an outlook on additional ecosystem market opportunities. The format today will be a little different from our previous webinars. The first two presenters will have about 12 minutes to walk us through their presentations, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A, and we'll save the remaining 30 minutes for a conversation with Jim. And I'm really looking forward to hearing his insights on key considerations for farmers interested in participating in ecosystem markets. So with that, let's get started. Back to you, Jean.
Thanks, Emily. And yeah, looking forward to this conversation. Our first speaker today is Elisa Wasserman-Drews. She is the Executive Director and founder of RIPE, the Rural Investment to Protect Our Environment, and a seasoned nonprofit program director and policy expert with a focus on facilitating consensus-based policy recommendations. She previously worked at the National Governors Association as Director of Energy and Environment, the Community Alliance with Family Farmers, and Business for Social Responsibility. Elisa received her master's degree in public affairs from Princeton University with a concentration in domestic politics and environmental policy through the Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy program. And Elisa, we are really glad you could join us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jean. Well, wonderful. Look forward to sharing a little bit about what we do here at RIPE, Rural Investment to Protect Our Environment. We're about investing in farmers and the environment. Next slide. And our mission is that we are a farmer-led organization dedicated to investing in rural America and rewarding farmers for voluntary conservation practices with a reasonable return as part of a coalition supporting federal climate policy. So in addition to the carbon sequestration benefits that farmers are providing, we believe farmers should be rewarded for the public value they deliver to that stacked ecosystem service, including soil health, water quality, and other environmental services. We believe American farmers have a pivotal role to play in tackling climate change, but they shouldn't sacrifice their own prosperity in the process. What we mean by that is that in the climate policy DC world, everyone is talking about carbon farming and only carbon farming. And that is not a deal that's going to really pan out for most farmers. And so we want a federal program that's going to provide fair compensation for farmers for that stacked ecosystem service value. Next slide. We are a farmer-led organization, and the next slide will provide some of our leaders. So Arkansas Rice, and the farmer that you're going to hear from later today, Jim Whitaker, is one of the leaders with that organization. Iowa Corn Growers, National Black Farmers Association, North Dakota Grain Growers Association, as well as many other farmers around the country are part of our board as well as our steering committee that lead the direction of our organization. Next slide. We have a key principles of our policy proposal, which is called RIPE 100. That is $100 per acre is what farmers should be receiving from a program. This level of payment reflects the public value that farmers are delivering to the ecosystem when you look at the carbon plus soil, water, and other ecosystem services. And at that level of compensation, $100 an acre, it's providing a reasonable return to farmers after the climate policy costs. We're going to go into some of that detail in the next slide. We also have a principle of simple enrollment for farmers, no penalty for early actors, and it's an equitable access to all farmers for the program, regardless of the farm size or type. Next slide. So when we think about what are the carbon farming, what is the climate policy and carbon farming opportunity for farmers? For most farmers and most practices, it's not going to pan out to make it a good deal. For those who it is a good deal, that's wonderful, and we're very supportive of it, and the policy that we're advancing will complement the private carbon market. So a farmer could participate in the private carbon market if they want to, and they would have the additional option to also participate in the program that we're advancing through RIPE 100. So to explain why this model is what we're pursuing, it's what we're trying to do is to shift the climate policy framework from what would be a cost of about $60 an acre for the typical corn farmer to a $40 per acre profit. How does it do that? So when you think about a climate policy that might come into play in our country, you begin with the fact that fertilizer costs will go up as regulations on the natural gas industry go into place. And we commissioned an analysis of agricultural commodities, 10 commodities across the country by region. And on average, it's about $33 per acre that a corn farmer would confront in the Midwest for extra fertilizer, fuel, electricity costs through that type of regime in around the era 2030. So you're starting off with a cost of $33 per acre, and then to participate in a carbon farming practice of, say, carbon farming program with, say, a practice of cover crops, you then have to pay $27 on average to adopt that practice. So that's $60 in policy costs right out of the gate. A carbon farming payment for cover crops would be at about $18 per acre at the price of $54 per ton, which is higher than what is currently being offered, but assuming that price goes up, we can generously assume that it goes up over time. It's still only $18. So that's a net loss for farmers, which is why most farm trade groups have opposed climate policy, thinking about the economic interests of their members. When farmers adopt that cover crop, they're providing society a tremendous amount of value that goes way beyond the carbon. The water quality benefits are about $50, soil health $20, water conservation $20, air quality benefits $7 an acre. It's over $100 at about $115 per acre. So our position is that a public program should be fairly compensating farmers at the about $100 an acre range to reflect that tremendous value that farmers are delivering. And at that price, the public is getting a good deal because they're getting all these public benefits, and farmers are getting a good deal because it's covering the policy, pro-carbon farming payments, plus farmers getting additional compensation. Next slide. It's a busy field out there in terms of what are all the different groups doing. And so just to clarify where we're different, and this is for the next slide, just quickly, it's an overwhelming, there's so many different groups, we hear all the time farmers are overwhelmed. Almost everyone in this space of agriculture and climate is talking about carbon farming. We're one of the only groups that's really talking about stacked ecosystem services. We're the only group at the federal level. You're going to hear after me from a speaker about a great program that's at the state and regional level. So there are some in that are looking at stacked ecosystem services, but there's no national public program initiative that's talking about stacked ecosystem services, and that's what we're focused on, putting farmer profitability at the center of a federal public conversation. Next slide. So how would it work? This is how the RIPE 100 pilot in phase 1 would work. You adopt one conservation practice from a menu of options of practices that deliver over $100 an acre in public benefits, and you would get compensated $100 per acre. No penalty for early actors. If you've already been doing this, that's fantastic, and you are continuing to contribute that benefit to society, so you should get compensated fairly for that. You would attend one free conservation workshop and get free technical assistance. And then to continue participating in the program, first it's annual contracts only. So you participate any year that you want to, you don't any other year. And then to continue in the program, you would create a tailored conservation plan that fits your farm's needs and would get free technical assistance to do that. And then you can continue participating in the program annually thereafter. Simple enrollment, simple self-verification. And this again complements the private carbon markets with the public guarantee. There's lots of precedent within existing farm programs that you could participate in the private carbon market if it works for you, plus participating in a public program, and that is the precedent that we're advancing. Because it would be a pilot or phase one, the program budget may have limitations that would potentially restrict it to 50 or 100 acres to enroll for this phase one. The goal of phase two, and next slide, is to eliminate those caps and really get to the entire program, your entire farm operation to get enrolled in the program, as much or as little as you as a farmer choose to participate and enroll. So the menu of options that we have currently drafted is things like no-till, cover crops, riparian cover, irrigation water management, and post-harvest flooding for rice farmers. These are all practices that have an ecosystem over $100 an acre. They're also practical for farmers, and most farmers have something on this list. We also are actively working with groups, including Jim, who you'll hear from, and others, to expand this list to make sure that there's enough practices for every farmer to participate and pick something that works for their farm. Next slide. In the interest of time, I'm going to just quickly, this is the phase two, I'm going to quickly skip over it, but again, just the main goal of phase two would be to have a larger budget, and so that every farmer could put in as much of their farm operation as they want. And then I'll move on to the next slide in the interest of time, but hopefully if you're interested in learning more, we can meet again and talk about that phase. So an example is if you're a corn farmer, 500 acres, you choose to enroll all 500 acres in adopting cover crops, that would be a payment of $50,000 per year. You then subtract internally what your costs are from practice adoption at $27 per acre for cover crops. You could internally subtract the cost of climate policy increases on your inputs, which is about $33 an acre. So you're looking at a net profit of $20,000 per year. This is the scale that we are looking to implement across the country. Next slide. Public opinion prefers this ecosystem stacked payment over the carbon only model. So while all of Washington, D.C. and all of the private market are only talking about carbon, it's actually that the public as well as farmers prefer the stacked ecosystem service. We just as a community haven't asked for it yet. So we commissioned a poll through Farm Journal this year that engaged farmers across the country, and 78% said that farmers said they prefer the stacked environmental service model over the carbon only. Also in the public opinion broadly, not just farmers, also prefer this model. So work done by Robert Bonney, who's now Climate Czar at USDA, found that rural Republicans in the Midwest only support government spending on climate at 39%, but at 39%, but 93% support financial incentives to farmers for water and soil health. So the public is already more supportive of compensating farmers for water and soil health than carbon, and we just simply as a community haven't gotten together and asked for that. Next slide. So we would love to continue the conversation. If you're interested in learning more, please contact us, and we'd love to brief your farm association and networks. Jamie Powers is my colleague who leads up our outreach and engagement, and his contact info is here. We have a newsletter where we can keep folks engaged, share more information, and we're about to launch a farmer advisory network where we welcome folks to help engage us in surveys and information and a champion toolkit if you're interested in advancing the idea. Farm trade association leaders are part of our steering committee, so we welcome opportunities to engage in that way, and technical experts are always invited. We welcome help expanding the set of practices and refining our policy details along the way. So thank you for your time and look forward to Q&A.
Thanks, Eliza. Yeah, and Jamie's contact information is there on the slide, and interesting presentation there. We will shift to our next presenter is going to focus a little bit more on one of those ecosystem services of focus on water quality markets. Bartlett Durand is the Director of Water Quality Partnership at Sand County Foundation, where he facilitates agreements that allow municipalities and utilities to achieve water quality goals by working with farmers and agricultural groups. His work is focused on developing documents that local government and state agencies can use to reach agreements with sufficient clarity for regulators that water quality goals will be met in the future. That sounds like a really a job for a creative attorney like Bartlett here. Bartlett is a creative attorney and a businessman with more than 20 years of experience in academic research, complex litigation, mediation, transactional work, and contract work focused on business outcomes. He also has started a few businesses, a artisanal cheese line from his family's dairy, a USDA inspected meat processing business, and a retail butcher shop, The Conscious Carnivore, which I've actually visited before, Bartlett, in Madison. Thank you, Bartlett, for joining us today.
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Don't hold the attorney part against me. I'm very focused on ag, but I'm not able to drive the tractor because my brother-in-law kicked me off and said, you can run the cheese business, but you can't run the machinery. So that's how that works in that world, as you probably all know. Sand County Foundation is an amazing organization, over 50 years of experience. It comes from Aldo Leopold. If you could switch the slide. Dr. Aldo Leopold wrote the Sand County Almanac, which is one of the seminal books on environmental conservation, wildlife game management, with a particular eye for the role that private landowners play. So our mission is really based on how we work with farmers and other private landowners. So if you could switch the slide. What we believe is really conservation can accomplish its objectives only when it springs from an impelling conviction on the part of private landowners. I can bribe people all day long, and as soon as the money goes away, if they don't believe in the underlying mission, then they may go away as well. So we really work on finding ways for farmers to really tap into the fundamental principles why they would do this. Next slide. I'm also co-housed with EPIC, Environmental Innovation Policy Center. What's really interesting about EPIC and why it works so well with Sand County Foundation is we're looking for barriers and to eliminate them and to streamline practices, which is where these watershed partnerships come in that we're going to talk about. Next slide. Fundamentally, what we're trying to do, it's kind of pictured here, is get people out of this idea of urban and rural and focus on something beyond political boundaries or even concepts and get into the watershed. Simple fact is we don't live without water. We don't live without clean water, and we're all in it and all responsible for it because there's so many of us. So we got to kind of clean up our own waste and how we're doing things. We can point the finger all day long at stuff, but fundamentally there are a lot of us working in a system that has worked to get us to this point, and now we need to be just cleaning up our mess. And that's what this is all about. So what we're trying to do is tie the needs of where the population base is with the needs of the farmers and the landowners and try to get people to work together all over clean water. So let's go to the next slide. Fundamentally, I like to say, if you want to know where you're going, you got to know where you are. So if I want to get to Ames, I got to know where I am now. I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. That's how I get to Ames, through this highway. I can do that. So next program. So everything we're going to talk about in these next slides is you have to start and understand your farm fundamentally, because what we're talking about is a change in practices. So anything we're going to talk about here on out starts with the farmer and a conservationist or farmer on their own getting their soil tests, understanding what their soil type is, understanding what they're planting, what the rotation has been, what their fertilizer need is. Things I would argue you probably need to be doing anyway, but it just puts a little extra focus on that. From that, we start to use models, which are, fancy computer programs or sometimes very simple Excel spreadsheets that say, if you make this change, here's how it will affect things. That sets up a mechanism that then lets the farmer make decisions on what to do on their farm. And from that, based on the program, payment can be made. So next program, please. This is an important point about the farmer has to be able to choose, because one size does not fit all. If you look at this slide, this is studies we did a few years ago, talking about if we gave a $25 payment, what was beneficial to the farmer and what was not. And even the same thing of cover crops had a swing of almost $400 depending on the type of soil and the type of farming practice and what was going on there. It's all over the map because it is not just farm by farm, sometimes it's field by field. Any farmer, any conservation out there, you know it is a very localized process of how we farm and what we do and what changes will be. So next slide, please. So almost all of our programs that we work with and encourage are whole farm practices. The simplest thing to think about is if we do a manure management deal and we take manure from being spread on 1 acre or 100 acres next to a creek, and we start paying someone to manage that nutrient and not put manure there, and they get a payment, but they move downstream and put all that manure on the 100 acres downstream, no one's benefited. So we generally look at a whole farm practice and recommend that for both the farmer and for any cities. So let's talk about what these programs actually are. And I'm going to go fast here. So if anybody wants follow up, you'll see my contact at the end. In Wisconsin, this has really taken off. There are 2 flavors to this. There's adaptive management, which is where a city takes control of responsibility for a watershed and tries to do improvement overall. And then there's water quality trading, where they literally trade nutrients from the watershed into a permit that's required in the city to reduce nutrients. Just real briefly, there from the Clean Water Act, and this is, I think, an important point. Clean Water Act in general won't touch farmers, won't touch the landscape out there where farmers are farming. It's excluded. In general, cities are under the hammer and they have certain requirements they must meet to keep us all healthy and clean. So there's a lot more attention on tightening nutrient reduction in the cities, because that's where the regulation can come. And that's where we're getting this pressure to say, cities, let's start working with our farm neighbors and see if we can trade, because there are more things we can do in the watershed than we can do just at the city. Think of it this way. At the municipal wastewater pipe, we have a pipe, we can measure it, we can kick it, but all we're doing is reducing nutrients from that pipe. If we do something in the watershed, we're reducing sediment, reducing the same nutrients or more nutrients. We may cool down the river, we may improve fish habitat, we may improve recreation, and hopefully we improve the environment around the farm and the field and the profitability of the farm itself. Many, many, many benefits versus kick the end of the pipe. Fundamental principle we're working off of. So we're going to flip through a bunch of programs here in Wisconsin. There's, I'm sorry, keep advancing. There we go. There's our Wisconsin. Now go to the next one. Okay, MDV. So we can have a bunch of cities come together and try to work on a watershed together. They also have the ability to buy their way out for $50 a pound. So that's kind of based on a wetland mitigation model. We're not sure how well it's working, but at the end of the day, $50 a pound is for phosphorus is kind of where you're seeing things revolve around in Wisconsin, except in many other exceptions. Let's go to the next one. We have this group that's offering up to $15 an acre for strip tillage, $20 for low disturbance manure injection. This is a farm group that has put this together, and they're trying to work within their own group what they have said they need. It's not somebody from the outside coming in. It's the farmers themselves saying, here's kind of what we need to make this work. Farmers making the decision on the amount of money they need to make things happen. Go to the next one, please. This is a group I worked with in Southwest Wisconsin. They were converting fields from row crops to pasture. The city needed permits and was able to work with them specifically and exactly. And they're now getting paid $21,000 a year for agreeing for basically 20 years to keep that land in pasture. Now, this was a heavy sediment area or sediment problem, so it worked out extremely well for both parties. Go to the next one, please. A really cool one also in Southwest Wisconsin, another big sediment issue. There's a dairy, and they were able to negotiate a complete rebuild of the dairy, $1 million ticket, and they provided the city provided engineering at a reduced cost, and they all split the cost. Farmer paid a third, Nrcs paid a third, and the city paid a third in exchange for the city getting the credits on the nutrient reduction. Next one, please. Another group up in Northeast Wisconsin, they're trying a cost share between 20 and 65 an acre-ish, depending on what it is. Again, trying to work with farmers and how the farmers come together. But again, this is a little more city driven on here, the menu of prices we can offer all over the map. And as you can see in Wisconsin, it is all over the map. Next slide, please. Key takeaways in Wisconsin, whether you're talking trading or adaptive management, a fundamental source to get into is farmer groups. Farmer groups are the resource, the information, and they can figure out what the farms need and the farmers need, and it gives a little more equal bargaining power. Individual contracting is extremely site specific. So if you're not in the right location with the right type of farming and enough credits, it's going to be a little harder to make a good bargain. But beyond the cost share, it's really the innovation has been the shared cost on upgrades, being able to get services at a discounted rate. And just for the purpose of this, I did a survey around the state, and I've seen trade range for phosphorus per pound of $37 a pound to $270 a pound, all over the map. Next slide. Let's talk about Iowa real quick. Iowa, what we did is we set up the Wisconsin model and tweaked it a little bit where it's much more, looks more like trading, but it's very watershed specific. It is very localized. And so what you can see here is we're doing is basically, you can't see it, I can see it in my little thing here. In the upper right corner, there's an agreement, a memorandum of understanding between the city and their water quality regulator to say, we will allow you to work in the watershed. We're going to use this model, the NTT nutrient tracking tool, and give you credit against your wastewater permit. What this has done in Iowa is really open up the door to allow cities to work with their upstream farmer partners and some downstream and really start working together on water in a very cooperative manner. So let's kick down one more. Sorry, next slide, thank you. So what it is this offset program. It right now is mostly individually contracting based on this pay for performance. We pay you based on what you actually, the models show you've reduced. So it's a key thing that it's not pay for practice, it's pay for performance, what you're actually reducing, farm specific, field specific, decided by the farmer. Go to the next slide. Iowa has really been getting hammered by floods. So flooding is the driver. And the nice thing with these programs is it layers all these benefits together. So the city can go try to work on flooding, but also be getting nutrient credits. They can focus some of their wastewater dollars on flood mitigation to protect the infrastructure of the city as a whole. It's a really great way to start aligning different things. Next slide. All of this gets dropped in the Army Corps of Engineers RIBITS program, Regulatory in lieu fee banking information tracking system. So it is a public document. The amount of information about the farm on the public document is minimal, but the idea of where it is and the amount of credit that was received is a big deal. That helps a lot of people have confidence in this program. Next slide. To give you an idea, there's over $1 million flowing into Iowa farms from the city, the municipalities based on this program. It is growing. We only have 4, maybe 5 agreements right now. It's going to go to 15 to 20 in the next couple of years. If you are in Iowa and you are close to a municipality that has needs, talk to them. Let's see what we can do out there. It's great stuff. It's also tiered. You can still sell greenhouse gas emissions to someone else if you're getting water quality credits. I remind people USDA right now is waiving claiming credits, so you can usually do EQIP funds in addition to one of these. Lots of options, lots of opportunities, just highly localized. That's how it's rolling. This is the general program we're trying to bring down into Illinois. Hopefully we'll get that going very soon. But if you're a farmer and you're in Iowa, if you're in Wisconsin, be aware of any talk about needing nutrient credits around from your local city. Look for farmer groups doing this kind of work. Answer the postcards. Next slide and last slide, which you guys will get later. Reach out to me. I talk to people, and I email. So there's my contact information.
Thanks, Bartlett. Great recap of lots of programs happening in the Midwest here. We are going to, I think Emily gave you all a teaser too. We're mixing this format up a little bit. If you've attended the previous webinars in our series here, we are going to do a little Q&A here with Bartlett and Eliza, and then go and hear more from our farmer representative, Jim Whitaker here. So looks like you both have your cameras on and mics on, and just kind of a reminder again, if you have any other, there's a little bit of drag on some of the audio and video for both of you, I think. So if you have any other programs that are open that are maybe pulling your bandwidth, you can just close those here so we can make sure we hear your responses. And we're going to try to get through as many questions as possible in so give you about a minute each or so to respond. And I'm kind of flexible on the order, just depending on which one of you is most ready to respond to the question. And our first question, I think, is actually directed more to Bartlett here. We heard a range of payments for the water quality credits in your programs, kind of all over the place, so and just to kind of compare that with where Lisa mentioned that, a value of $50 per acre for water quality benefits from cover crops. So we want to kind of dive into that a little bit and kind of figure out the comparison. But maybe first, Bartlett, can you give us a little more info on how these values are actually set? How were these dollar amounts determined?
It's the Wild West. Any farmer anywhere can talk about it. It's straight up negotiation. What does the city need? What's their worst case scenario? Now in Wisconsin, the regulatory pressure is so high, it's order of magnitude higher than Iowa, that they may be looking at an $18 million plant upgrade to get a tiny bit of nutrient reduction. And so they're willing to pour that money in, and that's where you get the $300 a pound rates. In Iowa, it may be they don't really need anything, but they're willing to do it. And so the rate may be just an overlay on a cost share.
Interesting. So it really is just supply and demand.
Negotiation. Farmers know how to negotiate. So it's straight up, but they don't need you and you don't need them. So it's kind of a getting through it.
Understood. Okay. And so, and Elisa, you have done quite a bit of work really looking at determining actual dollar amounts on these different services. So could you talk a little bit more about how the values were set through your analysis?
Sure. We're looking at a national public program, and so we use averages. So we draw our data from things like USDA's own analysis, Congressional Budget Office analysis, state land grant universities, and look at what are the general on average impact. It is certainly true that there really is high variability for individual farms, and for a private environmental quality trading market, it makes perfect sense that they would need to be very precise about what the specific values are that they're deriving. So it makes sense in the private environmental quality trading system to have that precision. But when you're talking about creating a national program that would fit for all farmers, we believe that you don't need that level of extensive farm level and that you can rely on national averages. That's generally the way 99% of public programs are designed, and we're just following that precedent that already exists for a national model.
So for both of you, and maybe I'll kind of start with Elisa here, is that you mentioned payments of $100 per acre for farmers, and so are those payments available for multiple years? And if so, I mean, how long can farmers expect to receive those payments?
Sure. We're looking at a program that would be part of a national climate policy, and there would be annual funds and annual payments. So President Biden is advancing a climate proposal that's in the $500 billion a year range. So when you're looking at that for every year, the amount of funding that we're talking about would be at about 8% of that, would allow all farmers across the country to enroll all of their acreage and operations, and livestock and animal units would be included in that as well. So every year there's going to be national spending on climate policy as part of the standard proposals that are being advanced, and so every year there would be funding available at this level.
So presumably, as long as farmers are continuing to implement a practice like cover crops or reduced tillage, they would qualify for some sort of tiered level of payment through the climate pot of money.
Exactly.
And Bartlett, how about the agreements you've seen? Are they multi-year, long-term? What's the time range?
Yeah, well, if it's done through an aggregator, it's however the aggregator sets it up. And those are the first couple webinars you did. For the direct relationships I'm seeing, they want them locked down 10 plus years, because basically they're betting their regulatory permit on the being able to do this type of trading. So you always see buffering and things like that going on, but there's it's a big deal for cities. It's a lot of trust. It's the metaphorical extending the open hand, and so they want reciprocity on that. Like, we're forming a partnership. Let's do this, and let me know I can do it in the long term.
Interesting. And then and I think this is maybe, Bartlett, more directed to you as well. How are these benefits being tracked and measured? Like, are the reductions based on modeled reductions, or is someone actually taking samples and testing?
It's both. So in Wisconsin, they have the SNAP Plus model, which really tracks phosphorus, which is the primary nutrient of concern in Wisconsin. So you change, here's what we were doing. If you remember that first slide with the roadmap, here's what we were doing, here's what we're doing now. This model, field specific, tells you kind of what's being kicked out, and then it goes through a DNR process to give you the credit. In Iowa, it's the nutrient tracking tool, which is a USDA supported tool for nitrogen and phosphorus. Does the same thing. You get a number, and it's creating a currency that everybody understands, everybody traded across. Both are constantly being tweaked and upgraded with local research. So the calibration's going away. Now, in both situations, in Iowa in particular, the state is responsible for overall monitoring. Any one project isn't going to show a measurable change in the monitoring because there's so much noise environment. We can go, that's a whole nother webinar. In Wisconsin, if you do the adaptive management, the local municipality, if they're taking responsibility for the watershed, they monitor the watershed and balance against progress shown by the model, if that makes sense. We can show by the model good things are happening, even if the measurement isn't showing it yet, because again, the amount of noise and system, the size of the system and how long it's going to take to work its way out.
Sure. And so, a lot of these, I remember this question just takes me back to the very first webinar we had in February, where farmers are signing up for contracts. They're saying they're going to do stuff. And so for either one of your programs, and maybe we can start with, we'll start with you, Bartlett. How are we actually verifying that the farmers are doing what they promised to do, and not trying to catch a farmer in the act, but more like what is the requirement that farmers have to do in terms of data, records, compliance, et cetera, to make sure that to prove that they're actually doing these practices?
It's actually the responsibility of the city or the aggregator. I mean, it's one of these companies that comes out to have the communication with the farmer to document data planting, what they planted, change in systems. And when they submit to get the credit, they have to kind of have that information. But to be honest, with the age of the smartphone, here's a picture of me with the timestamp planting my cover crops. Here I am standing in the field with my cover. It's not that hard to show you actually did the work. And if you do edge of field practices, it's a thing, right? It's a thing you can go look at and go, there it is. But that comes back on the responsibility of the cities to do the work with the farmers in a fairly normal way.
And what about the program, or kind of how do you see your program rolling out, Elisa, in terms of farmer record keeping and compliance?
Yeah, we're very similar. Farmers self-certify their practices and submit their paperwork, and USDA will have audit authority, as they do with current Nrcs programs, for 5% of participants. And the Congressional Budget Office has put out studies on this, saying that that's a very effective program, that there has not been wide-scale fraud amongst farmers in these programs. And so we're saying, let's just keep doing that rather than requiring these very extensive verification processes, which for the private market, again, makes sense. There's a logic for why the private market needs to have those extensive verification processes. But for a public program, it's not necessary. Audits have demonstrated that it's a good use of public funds. And then we would also have, in terms of greenhouse gas additionality, probably some soil sampling for a subset of farmers participating in it, so that there could be reports to Congress about what the additional and net greenhouse gas impacts are, using a subset of farmers and then extrapolating that with models to demonstrate what the national impact is.
And I guess, I understand, Lisa, your program is kind of just more like policy proposal. It's not, do you actually have some programs or pilots on the ground right now?
Right, so we are a federal proposal and we are looking to do a pilot. We have a couple of our partner organizations that we're looking to partner with and welcome if there are suggestions for potential funders or organizations that help pilot those on the ground, we would welcome that opportunity to partner.
Great, because that was actually the next question I was going to ask both of you was like, say there's a local group, maybe it's a group of farmers, maybe it's a watershed group, maybe it's the local soil and water conservation district, and they're tuning in here and they're like, oh, I want to do this in my county. You know, really, what is the first step, or how would they get involved? And so maybe Aliza, you can just kind of pick up on that. Like, do they reach out to Jamie, or what's the best first step for them?
Sure. Yeah, you can reach out to Jamie or anyone on our team. We have Midwest organizers and a wonderful team of folks who are delighted to talk with you. Joining our newsletter to get involved, asking us to engage your trade association. Basically, we talk on the Hill with members on both sides, and their doors are wide open. They said, this is great. What they need is farmers asking for this. So the real way to turn this into reality is getting farm trade groups to get involved and say, this is something that we want to advance. And for that to happen, farmers and farm leaders need to get involved and learn about it, constructively engage in policy design, and move it forward. But what we're hearing from senior members on the Senate and House side is that their doors are open if farmers ask for this. And so the conversation and the way to move this forward is really to organize within farm communities to see if this is something that we can collectively hash out the details and bring it to Congress.
And how about you, Bartlett?
I'm a huge fan of farmer groups. I think that is, I mean, we're actually going to do a huge initiative pushing farmer groups coming together. And the nice thing when you get farmers working together, they can help each other figure out the best ways. And then finding partners becomes easier because now as a group, they can reach out to where the population or body of interest is nearby. So I see farmer groups partnering with lake shore or lakeside associations where they may be just trying to protect their little tiny lake and are mad at the farmers. But once they start talking, they go, oh, well, we can actually do things. Like, yeah, I could do all this stuff, but it costs me money. And they'll, oh, we got money, we'll send you money. So even completely outside this regulatory environment, you see partnerships where people start to understand each other's needs, and it just lowers the temperature and people find solutions. Certainly reaching out to any municipality or large company that has one of these permits, easy way to go. You're going with the solution. Hey, we've got 12 farmers and 12,000 acres, you know, wherever you are. We're willing to engage in this work. Can we work together? And there's a lot of work by farmers and farmer groups trying to do direct relationship on climate change, on the carbon market. Like, why do we have to go through brokers? And that's being worked out now. But fundamentally, you know, I guess two answers. One, if a municipality comes knocking or sends out a postcard or phone call, don't blow them off. It may be a one-off opportunity, see what you got. Two, work with your group or form a group and reach out and say, look, we're willing to do some things. Let's see what we can do. Nrcs will love you. Soil water conservation will love you. Local lakeside people will love you. The local city will love you. Just showing interest and willing to help and partner in a program.
Sure. So I think I'm gonna ask one more question here in terms of, you know, obstacles or challenges or lessons learned from getting these programs off the ground. You know, what are some of the internal challenges, well, and or also feedback from external partners and farmers through the process? And maybe Bartlett, maybe this is a good one for you to start with in terms of connecting the dots with those farmer groups and municipalities.
We live in a poisoned environment. And I mean that more politically, socially. There's so much mistrust, so many fingers have been pointed. And I've heard this from the city side and from the urban and from the rural side. Once people are willing to look at the problem and address what they can do, not point the finger at anybody else, but here's what I can do, and reach out and ask for help and being able to and being willing to share resources, time, material, money. That's how you start building trust. And it just takes time and it takes sincerity. And I hate to say it, those are in short supply. But as cities see the necessity of this watershed approach, it makes all the sense in the world. And then you get all these benefits. You get the ability to, for the city side, they can stack financing and stack expertise and stack interest within their city populations, recreation, fishing, I mean, hiking, watershed protection, or flood protection, all kinds of things. On the farmer side, they start going, oh, well, these are kind of my customers, and they're going to help me do something I'd kind of like to do anyway, and they're going to take some of the stress off me having to make all these decisions on my own. And I get to meet my neighbor. When you get farmers working together, they get to do something together they usually like. They just don't have many opportunities. It ends up being a win-win, but it's that taking that first step with a hand out, willing to trust and try.
Great. How about you, Aliza? Any kind of final thoughts or lessons learned, takeaways from your program?
Sure. We believe farmers really have a pivotal role to play in tackling climate change, and they shouldn't have to sacrifice their economic viability and prosperity in the process. So simply shifting the conversation away from the cost share limitations to a profit creation of reasonable return that allows the public to get a good deal from the stacked environmental services and allows farmers to earn a reasonable return. We think there's plenty of openness in the public, plenty of openness in Congress, and the core challenge is getting farmers to start thinking about, is this a model that I would be willing to go to bat for? Farm trade associations by nature are more defensive in their the way that they operate, reasonably so, in terms of protecting their constituents from negative policies, but finding a way for a proactive approach on policy that can help farmers is something that farmers themselves need to really think about, decide, and become the leaders to then help their trade associations choose to move in that direction. So individual farmers getting involved, helping us shape this to make it work for them and their trade associations, we think is the way that we can all benefit.
Great. Well, thank you both for spending some time with us. I see there's a couple questions, people wanting to connect with you all a little bit more. So what we will do is I'll ask maybe Emily or Beth to post email contacts for Bartlett and for Jamie with RIPE in the chat so that the audience has that and can follow up with them. And we are going to shift this conversation. Lisa, I feel like you gave me the perfect setup. You know, we got to get individual farmers in the game here, and we are going to hear from our final speaker today, which is Jim Whitaker. Jim is a fifth-generation farmer and on family-owned and operated Trinity Farms and you know what, Jim? I forgot to ask you how to say the name of your town. I'm from Illinois. You got to help me out. Like, I'm not familiar with Arkansas names. Is it McGehee? McGehee?
It's just McGee.
McGee. Okay, there's a bonus E in there for some reason. Okay, McGee, Arkansas. His family farm dates back to 1890, and today Jim and his brother Jim produce. Jim and his brother Sam produce rice, cotton, soybeans, and corn. Jim graduated from McGee High School and the Army Military Academy in Arkansas and attended college for 2 years, and he and his wife Leslie have been married for 29 years with 2 grown children. Jim, you're very active off of the farm too. You are a member of the Arkansas Rice Farmer Board, the Arkansas Rice Research and Promotion Board, USA Rice Farmers Conservation Committee, and the Rice Sustainability Committee, Rice Foundation, USA Rice Farmers Board of Directors, and you're a member of the RIPE Steering Committee, and you are you've had some accolades, named the Rice Farmer of the Year in 2012 and the National Rice Conservationist in 2014. And in 2016, which is all this leading up to why we want to talk to you, is that you were recognized as the first farmers globally to sell sell carbon credits for rice production. So thank you so much for joining us today. And instead of doing a formal presentation, we're going to do a little bit of interview style for you. But do remind the audience to submit questions through the question bar. So we'll look at your first slide here. Jim, I'm just kind of hoping you can provide us a brief introduction to your family farm and tell us how you got involved with conservation practices.
So good afternoon. I farm in Southeast Arkansas with my brother Sam, and we are a 5th generation farmer, but the generation before me struggled financially to maintain the farm. So when we started farming, we actually got a FHA beginning farmer loan. We had to rent the worst ground rentable. I mean, no one rents ground to a 23-year-old. So a 23-year-old that rents the farm is getting something no one wants. So the only way we could really transition is to be on top of rapidly making our farm better. We do that in the South through land leveling, irrigation, drainage. So we were in the Nrcs every time the doors were open, trying to find the next newest practice, the next newest incentive, the next, equip project or whatever. So that's just the way we began farming, the way we survived. So it's just kind of been a natural progress for us, is constantly looking for the next newest thing and developing farms. Just a rapid farm development over the last 25 years is what I would say.
And so can you kind of give us an idea of where you are now in terms of, acreage, different crops, and also some of the conservation practices that you're utilizing?
So we farm rice, cotton, corn, and soybeans. My first year farming, I had 90 acres of rice. Last year we had 9,000. We had first year farming, had a couple hundred acres of cotton, and last year we had about 3,800. Total farm acreage is about 17,000. And so in 25 years, we went from just a few hundred acres to 17,000, and every acre of it is highly developed. When we attain a farm, we immediately go to them with a list of what needs to be done, how to improve drainage, how to improve irrigation, how to improve soil health. And so on the rice side, rice is a crop that's grown in a flooded environment. What we learned through other farmers and just going to conferences is we could reduce our water by about 50% if we land leveled it flat. So our rice is completely flat, 0 grade. And then we even were able to reduce it lower by adding a practice called alternate wetting and drying, which is a practice that generated the carbon credits that we'll talk about in a minute. On our cotton, corn, and soybeans, we have cover crops, water sensors, pipe planter, no-till. I mean, it's just, and then something most people never talk about, but in all of that, we're managing habitat. So all of our farms have flooded, forested areas. Winter waterfowl are a big deal for us. With that much rice, we have every field is flooded during the winter for waterfowl habitat. So we're constantly trying to figure out about, not only are we looking at soil, water, and air, but we're also looking at habitat all the time.
Great. So I mentioned I'm from Illinois and I need a little help with Arkansas. I'm not that familiar with rice production, but no, I have a lot of corn and soybean around me. And we're also, sometimes we have flooded fields, but we don't necessarily appreciate that very much here. But definitely the use of cover crops, is something that is valuable and being recognized as having benefits. And so I know the next slide includes kind of a picture of some of the water quality benefits. So maybe you can just explain a little bit of what we're seeing here on this slide.
So on the right, the young man holding the jars, that's my son. When he was in high school, I wanted to get him involved and understand what we were doing. So we did I connected him with a researcher that I work with a lot, Dr. Michelle Reba. She is a USDA hydrologist, and she's just unbelievable work. So she organized him a 3-year study to do a water quality on our farm. So the jar on the left is surface water that we're picking up. That's water that's passing by our farm that we're using for irrigation. And the jar on the right is in the field. So we did a 3-year study and we showed that water is cleaner when it leaves our farm than when we pick it up. The picture on the left with the clean water going into the dirty water was the first year we had cover crops, And that is a picture outside my back door. That bayou is a bayou Bartholomew. It's the longest bayou in the world, and it flows right through my backyard. And the first year we had cover crops, I took this picture, sent it to my brother. I said, look at the difference in the water. So immediately it clicked. We not only were cleaning up our water and saving soil erosion, but we were also saving irrigations by increasing our soil organic matter. So cover crops have been a challenge. They are very much a challenge for farmers, but the benefits are so important.
And I guess you used kind of your experience and you know, with these conservation practices as a foundation for a SIG grant, right? With NRCS, a Conservation Innovation Grant. Could you tell us a little bit about that grant program in terms of what you set out to do and how successful it was?
Okay, so I've always found that I learn best by attending conferences or going to meet farmers. So I've always figured out who was the best in my area or even in another state doing something that I was interested in. I would just go to their farm and go inside their shop and meet them. I mean, I would call first, obviously, but I would go meet these guys and I would ask them, how are they doing it? I want to see it. I want to go to your farm. I want to get my feet dirty and see it. So I was attending a conference probably in 2012. One of the speakers was talking about carbon credits, and he was talking about water reduction and water quality and automation. And then so immediately when I got home, I shot him an email. And the next week he came and visited me and said, hey, are you interested? Let's talk about this. So we set up some of the first automation in rice fields. And my first generation was just basically floats that were sitting in a rice field. It had a graph where the float went up and down, measuring the water. And I had a camera, and I would look at it through my cell phone, and I would turn the well on or turn the well off with my cell phone. And I said, okay, I'm gonna not go to this field all year. I'm gonna water it remotely with a cell phone. And we did that. And so that was first generation. From there, we all collaborated together in probably 2015 to get a SIG grant, Conservation Initiative Grant, Innovation Grant. And the goal was, we had 3 goals: to create a carbon market for rice. We knew that if we allow rice to dry down during the growing season, we would reduce methane gas by about 1 ton to 1.5 tons an acre. And we knew that if we lowered our nitrogen use, we would reduce nitrous oxide. So those things together with no-till and other things would generate these so-called carbon credits. And we had, it was kind of a theory, but our first goal was to create a rice carbon market. Second goal was to create a sustainable certification. We wanted something similar to the organic certification for sustainability. We thought that there could be a new emerging market that was right under or right above, probably in my opinion above organic, that consumers could pay for, and they could help farmers by supporting their products. And the third goal was we were going to promote our product as sustainable. So in 2015, we wrote the grant. We had to have somewhere to house the grant. So White River Irrigation District, managed and oversaw the grant. And then we had to figure out who our collaborators were. So a couple farmers were listed as collaborators, a couple researchers. I happened to be one of them. And we went through this process. In 2016, we sold the first rice carbon credits to Microsoft. 2017, I turned in all my information and the line just went cold. 2018, hey, what's going on? No one wants to talk about carbon credits. It's kind of discouraging, but we learned a lot along the way. It's not the selling of carbon credits wasn't the true measure of the success. True measure was We reduced our water use 50%. We reduced our nitrogen 20%. Our water is cleaner when it leaves the farm. So that was the economic benefit, more so than the selling a carbon credit.
And so when we met with you a few weeks back, just kind of planning this out, one of the other things you mentioned that you learned was just kind of which data points are, you started kind of tracking everything under the sun and how that was a challenge. So talk a little bit about your journey with the data, so that in the end, you actually could document that you were saving money by managing your water, or saving money by reducing inputs or whatever.
So we're currently running about 7 different softwares on the farm. Each company or equipment dealer that you deal with has their own software, and even our consultant has his software. Then our water consultant has his software. None of them speak to each other. None of them talk to each other. Not one set of software, whether it's AdWorld, LandDB, My John Deere, none of them have everything you need, because they're dealing with, depending on their core mission, their business, they're dealing with record keeping, financial, or passes from a tractor, but it doesn't encompass everything you do. It doesn't ask all the key questions. Like, I've got one software that is my actual favorite that I run every day, but it doesn't ask what farm number or FSA tract or field number that a field is. So then when you go to the Nrcs, first thing they want to know is, you did all this, what FSA farm field and tract number? So after beating my head against the wall for several years, I just sat down last year and built my own program, and had about 56 columns. Then I gave it to the researchers and the tech company I'm working with, and through models and stuff, they pulled out about 12 that were actually important. So there's only about 12 that we're really tracking. So the simplistic view of what I did last year, and we're building off of it, is I created a Google Drive. And I said, what's important? What types of records do I need? Do I need yield maps? Do I need FSA 578s? Do I need water records? Do I need fertilizer records? What I need? So I put it all in a folder in the Google Drive, and then shared it with the key members of the team that were working on this. Then behind the scenes, we got, like I said, a tech company involved, and one of our researchers that we collaborated with for years went and did all the calculations on the back end. If you do this, this is the result. So we've got pretty good data, and we can take it down. Now we can take it down to the finished good per pound of rice, greenhouse gas saved per pound, water saved per pound. It's pretty interesting.
And I know you also shared with us you're kind of using that, or you were a little bit frustrated with trying to work with external partners for these markets. So you shared with us that you're working towards developing a product where you can kind of own it from your farm to the consumer. So I'm hoping maybe you can share a little bit about your latest venture and where that's going.
So one thing you have to realize as a farmer, all the big companies you're dealing with, all the global companies, they have sustainability initiatives. They've got their 2020 plans and their 2025 goals and their 2030, and they have no idea how they're going to accomplish them. And if you're a farmer, ultimately they're going to accomplish these goals on your hard work and efforts. So what I started doing years ago was reading, going to their website, figuring out what they needed. And if I was working with a company, I would just kind of raise my hand and say, well, I can do that. I can help you with your water reduction. I can help you with that. And we figured out that they were open to some of those things. But then there was always pushback. They would say, you want us to pay you to save water? No, I want you to pay me to validate that I save water so you can make a global claim on your website. And it was always got kind of pushback. So a year or so ago, we started down a path. I was presenting at a conference, and when I got off the podium, there was a lady standing there, and she said, I'm here to find a farmer to build a market with. And she said, I want to do it with you. So we started our journey, and we've been in it for about 2 years, and we're pre-launch, but we're about a month out from putting our package. More than likely, to start off with e-commerce and then go from there.
So that's exciting. I'm sure you've learned a whole new set of lessons as you shift. Obviously, you learned a lot of lessons in taking over some pretty crappy ground and building it up into something productive and scaling all of that, of course. And now you're becoming like a direct marketer and all that. So I really appreciate your time. So I know we could talk a long time because there's a lot of good stories you have, and it's fun to chat with you. I am hoping, we can just maybe do a little bit of an exercise with you to try to capture for our audience and for all of us to just benefit from your experiences. What are the top considerations that farmers should keep in mind as they're thinking about, entering? Maybe there's just all different levels. Are they adopting these practices? Are they entering a market? You have so many experiences. So I know Megan has kind of her notebook up here. If you want to share your thoughts with us, Jim, whatever you're willing to tell us, we can capture this and learn from your experience. What's the most important thing?
You got to keep good records. I mean, number one is keep good records. You can't measure what you can't you can't measure it or quantify it if you don't have the records. You've got to keep good records. And the problem is every farmer speaks a little bit different language. So one farmer may say, I put out 100 pounds of urea, and another farmer says, I put out a 4600. And when you put that into a data platform, the computer says, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. So standardized data is the key to all this. Everybody has to put the same information in the same way. And that's what our group has developed on our platform as a standardized data collection. What are the important pieces of data and how are we going to put them in the box? Other thing, is just have a clear vision of what you want to accomplish. That'd probably be number two, just have a clear vision of what you want to accomplish. And then after I always think about the what, I think about the how. So you can always say you want to make, a difference in the world, but how are you going to make a difference? So the how is very important. And every farmer has that what and that how. They can affect soil, they can affect air quality, they can affect water quality or quantity. They just have to figure out what works for their farm. It will be different. I promise you, from Southeast Arkansas to the Midwest is a huge difference in the way we do things, but farmers can affect change. Probably more so than any other group globally that I know of. Any single group globally, farmers probably can affect the biggest change. Third thing is, I would say do your homework and find the experts in the field. Find out who those guys are. Shoot them an email, call them on the phone, text them, build a relationship. I am probably, you would think, if you look at what we've done in rice, you would think that we were the pioneers in zero grade. We were not, but I knew the pioneers. I met them and I called them and I went to their shop and I learned from them. So find the local experts and build those relationships. Build fourth thing, build a working relationship with your Nrcs. That is a link to all these programs. They know what's going to work in your area. So get to know your local Nrcs people. Try to implement some practices. And, just kind of, and the last thing is ask yourself, how can we affect, soil, water, and air? There's three things. I'm gonna say there's four with habitat, but you want to be a good steward of the soil, the water, the air, and the habitat. How can you affect change? And everybody can, whether it's cover crops or no-till or water reduction, they can affect positive change.
Great. Those are great. Megan has done a great job capturing, and thank you, Megan. I know people can get self-conscious about their spelling and their typing, but I feel like you did a great job capturing Jim's comments and really sage advice, I think, in terms of what we, not just farmers. I mean, I feel like many of these things are good for anybody, whatever industry, your personal life, your family life you're in. So I really appreciate you joining us today, Jim. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. And we'll this is the end of the conversation. Actually, in the past webinars, I've always said we'll continue this conversation the next day, but this is our final webinar in the series. And so just thank you again to all of our presenters today. I'm just going to have a few points as we wrap up today. I think we have a few wrap-up slides that Megan will pull up here, and just kind of a teaser for people seeking CEUs to get your phone ready, because we'll have that QR code here in a second. As you leave today's webinar, a window will open on your browser with a survey that will take just a few minutes for you to complete. We appreciate your feedback, and thank you in advance for answering those questions. We also invite you to check web links for any of today's presenters. I did put the URLs for both RIPE and Sand County Foundation, and I know we put email contacts already in the chat. And then Jim's Facebook, Whitaker Grain Facebook page is there too. But Jim, if you're comfortable, maybe you can just let us know and we can send your email in the chat as well if people are interested in contacting you. And of course, all this information is going to be posted on ISAP's website, ilsustainableag.org. And we'll be posting resource documents that we've developed, video recordings, as well as a request form for the CEU. And then on Friday, you'll all receive a follow-up email from GoToWebinar with these links and an additional survey that's going to just get some feedback on the entire series. And it'll just take 2 minutes for you to complete, and there's an opportunity to win a $100 gift card with that. So hopefully look for that, and hopefully can get some good feedback from you all. For individuals seeking those continuing education credits, the QR code is right there on the screen. And you can use your CCA app to request credits for this. If you don't have the CCA app, again, you can use the form that's available through our website. And just note that each session has been approved for 1.5 hours, and you need to submit your information for each session that you attended. There's 4 individual forms, 4 individual codes, etc. The deadline, please submit your request by Friday, July 30th, so that we can get everything submitted to the agronomy societies. And thank you for joining us on this journey, exploring the dynamic world of ecosystem markets. It has been a pleasure to work with the planning team and all of the presenters, and I have utmost gratitude for my presentation teammates, for Beth, Megan, and Emily. And I hope that all of you found the discussion informative. And if you'd like to lend your voice to resource documents or future webinars, contact us at ilsustainableag@gmail.com. Stay well.